It began with a whisper, a small, gentle question spoken so quietly, it almost slipped away unnoticed. Meghan's own mother, Doria, leaned in one day and asked something that froze everyone around her. "What are Archie and Lilibet like? I've never really seen them." For a moment, nobody knew how to respond because a grandmother is supposed to know. She's supposed to have memories, birthdays, little giggles, sticky hands reaching for hers. She should be able to describe their smiles, their voices, their favorite toys. But Doria couldn't. Not because she forgot, because she says she had never really been with them. Those 10 quiet words cracked open a door nobody expected to look behind. If the grandmother, the woman closest to Meghan, rarely saw the children, then who did? And why did she sound almost afraid to ask? It was the first sign that something about Meghan and Harry's perfect family life didn't quite match the bright picture shown to the world. Something inside their home wasn't lining up, and once that first whisper escaped, more truths began slipping out. Truths from someone who had lived inside those walls far longer than anyone else. Someone who had seen everything except the one thing she was supposed to see. When the maid finally spoke, her voice was disguised. Not because she wanted attention. She didn't. She spoke because she couldn't carry the weight of silence anymore. She worked in Meghan and Harry's house for months, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. She cleaned every room, walked through every hallway, and watched the daily life of the home unfold right in front of her. Yet, she said the house never felt alive. It didn't sound like a place where children laughed. It didn't look like a place where a family lived. Instead, she said it felt like a movie set, the kind where everything is placed carefully for a scene and then frozen in time once the camera stops rolling. Every room was perfectly arranged. Too perfect. Nothing was out of place. Nothing looked used. Nothing had the warm messiness that real life always brings. The maid didn't talk like someone trying to cause trouble. She didn't speak with anger or excitement. Her tone was steady, almost tired, like someone who wishes what she saw wasn't true. And she said the most unsettling part of all wasn't something she saw. It was everything she didn't see. A house with children is loud. Even the quiet ones leave a trail behind. Tiny shoes by the door, crayons under the table, toys where they shouldn't be. There's always a giggle, a cry, a footstep, a mess. But in Meghan and Harry's mansion, none of that existed. The maid says she never saw toys, never saw clothes drying in the sun, never heard laughter, never heard crying, not even a small sock forgotten under a chair. Nothing. She said she would walk into a room and pause, waiting to hear something, anything that would prove children lived there. But there was only silence, a heavy, still silence that made her stomach twist. One afternoon, she asked another staff member quietly, "Do you ever see the children?" The woman simply shook her head and whispered, "Never." And this wasn't after 1 week, not after 1 month. This was after months of working sunrise to sunset. The world believed Archie and Lilibet were growing up behind those gates. But the people inside, the ones who cooked, cleaned, and lived in the house every day, couldn't find a single trace of them. It was this eerie emptiness that made the maid start asking herself the same question Doria had whispered. Where were the children? The deeper the maid went into her memories, the stranger the picture became. In a normal home, a mother moves through the house with purpose, checking on the kids, talking to them, picking up their favorite things. But Meghan's appearances never felt like that. At first, Meghan came by 3 or 4 times a week. But even then, she didn't stay long. She would sweep through the front door like someone stepping onto a stage. Always talking fast, always looking busy. The maid said she was never alone. There was always someone trailing behind her. Marcus Anderson, a blonde assistant. Sometimes even a full camera crew carrying lighting and sound equipment. To the staff, it didn't feel like a family home anymore. It felt like a production set, a place where scenes were filmed but not lived. And as the weeks rolled by, Meghan's visits dropped to just 2 days a week. The staff whispered to each other that she seemed more like a guest than a mother, almost like she was stopping by to check on a project rather than returning to her own children. Worse still, the maid noticed something unsettling. Meghan's moments inside the house looked rehearsed. She would speak to people only when the cameras were present, glance at her reflection more than she glanced at the rooms, and moved through the house like she was performing a role. It began to make sense why the maid said the home didn't belong to a family. It belonged to an image, and that image was starting to crack. The turning point came late one evening, an incident the maid says she'll never forget. She was wiping down the counters in the kitchen when she heard shouting echoing down the hallway. Loud, angry, sharp enough to make her stop what she was doing. She moved closer, not to listen, but because the voices were impossible to ignore. She recognized Meghan's voice first, but what froze her was the sound of Harry's voice. Not angry, not even firm. He sounded desperate, pleading. When the maid reached the doorway, she saw something that made her heart drop. Harry was holding Meghan's arms, begging her to stop as she tried to strike him. He wasn't fighting back. He wasn't yelling. He looked defeated. His face was red, but not with rage, with humiliation, with exhaustion. And standing nearby was Marcus Anderson, stepping in to pull Meghan back as Harry stumbled into a chair. The house went silent after that. A cold, heavy silence that felt different from all the others. The maid stepped in quietly and brought Harry a glass of water. He whispered, "Thank you." And in that moment, she said she saw everything. The weight he carried, the pressure behind his eyes, the sadness of a man who once stood proudly before the world, but now seemed lost inside his own home. After that night, everything changed. The smiles became rarer, the laughter disappeared, the atmosphere thickened with tension, and the illusion of a happy home grew thinner and thinner. But the part of her story that shocked people the most was this. The maid said she never once saw Meghan pregnant. Not with Archie, not with Lilibet. Not at any point during the months she worked there. She didn't see a baby bump. She didn't see morning sickness. She didn't see the small, everyday changes that happen to a woman expecting a child. Nothing. At first she thought maybe she had missed the signs, but she worked 12-hour shifts 5 days a week. She saw Meghan almost daily before the visit slowed down. She saw her up close, passing through hallways, brushing past counters, adjusting her clothes, and still no signs of pregnancy. When she whispered her concerns to other staff members, they admitted the same thing. They had noticed nothing either. Meanwhile, outside the mansion gates, magazines showed glowing photos, elegant dresses, perfect smiles, hands cradling a perfectly round belly. But inside the home, the image did not match the reality. The maid said her voice never shook when she shared this part. She wasn't claiming anything dramatic, only stating what she witnessed, or rather what she didn't. And for her, that was the biggest truth of all. Something about those pregnancies simply didn't add up. Months after leaving the job, the maid sat alone in her small apartment one evening when the Netflix documentary about Meghan and Harry aired. She wasn't sure what to expect. Maybe seeing parts of the home she cleaned, maybe recognizing rooms she had polished until they shined. But as she watched, something strange happened. The house in the documentary didn't match the house she worked in. The angles were wrong. The rooms were shaped differently. Even the garden, the one she walked past every day, didn't look the same. The documentary showed Meghan smiling in soft sunlight, cradling a baby bump that the maid insists she never saw in real life. There were scenes of Meghan and Harry playing with their children in a bright garden, chickens clucking nearby, laughter floating through the air. But to the maid it all felt foreign, unfamiliar, almost like watching actors recreate someone else's life. She had cleaned the real garden, she had swept the dirt beneath the real chicken coop, but she never saw the children there, not once. What the world saw as intimate moments she viewed as scenes filmed somewhere else. Maybe a rented property, maybe a studio, but not the home she knew. And that realization hit her like a stone. If the footage wasn't filmed where they lived, what else wasn't real? That question stayed with her long after the credits rolled. The maid had always known Meghan and Harry guarded their privacy. But the longer she worked there, the more she felt the house wasn't designed to protect a family. It was built to protect secrets. Every morning before stepping through the gate, staff had to hand over their phones. Security guards checked their bags, patted down their pockets, and scanned them for anything that could record or capture images. Inside, cameras followed the staff instead of the children. Silence followed them instead of laughter. The rules were strict and absolute. No photos, no notes, no whispers to anyone outside. She remembered one afternoon when a fellow worker simply took a photo of flowers outside the entrance. Within minutes, security stormed in, demanded her phone, and deleted the image. The air turned ice cold. From that moment on, the maid understood. This wasn't about privacy. This was about control. The home didn't feel like a safe space. It felt like a fortress, a place where truth was locked behind thick walls, and silence was the only language allowed. And the more the staff were forced to hide, the more obvious it became that something behind those walls wasn't meant to be seen. As time passed, the maid realized she wasn't the only one who felt uneasy. Quiet conversations happened in hallways, in the kitchen, in the laundry room, never loud enough for security to hear, but whispered with a kind of fear that grew deeper each day. Workers who had been in the house far longer than she had admitted the same thing. They had never seen Archie. They had never seen Lilibet, not once. One woman who handled laundry whispered, "There are no children's clothes to wash." Another worker who handled groceries admitted, "I've never bought baby food." Even the security guards, usually stone-faced and silent, sometimes exchanged looks that said more than words ever could. None of these people were dramatic. None of them were trying to start trouble. They were simply stating what their days looked like. And oddly enough, all their days looked the same. The staff inside Meghan and Harry's home lived through an emptiness the world outside never saw. They watched silence fill the spaces where childhood should have lived. And as more staff quietly acknowledged the same pattern, one truth became impossible to ignore. Everyone inside the home felt that something was missing, something important, something the outside world believed was right there behind the gates. But no one inside could find a single trace of it. And this brings us to the moment where every thread finally tightens. A grandmother who whispers that she has never truly seen the children. A maid who lived inside the home for months and saw a perfect set, but not a family. Rooms with no toys. Hallways with no giggles. Days with no tiny footsteps echoing through the mansion. A mother who arrived rarely surrounded by assistants and cameras. A father whose sadness grew heavier with every passing week. A documentary filmed in places the maid didn't recognize. Strict rules designed to keep eyes out and silence in. Piece by piece, the story forms a shape. Not an accusation, not a rumor, but a quiet, unsettling picture painted by the people who lived it. And at the heart of that picture is a question, one whispered by Doria, one echoed by every staff member who worked behind those gates. And one the maid still asks herself late at night when she thinks about the house she once cleaned. If the people closest to Meghan and Harry never saw Archie and Lilibet, then where were the children? The world has seen photos, interviews, and glossy moments wrapped in music and warm lighting. But the people who lived inside the mansion saw something entirely different. They saw emptiness. They saw silence. They saw a story so carefully crafted that even the truth struggled to escape. And as long as that question remains unanswered, the silence surrounding it only grows louder. Because in the end, every illusion eventually fades. And when it does, the truth is always waiting behind it.